For as long as I could remember, people had been watching me. I couldn't leave my house without people staring. They immediately tried to act casual the second I met their gaze, like they'd never been looking at me in the first place, but I knew better. I'd gotten very good at reading faces quickly, and it's easy when they're always pointed in your direction. I saw a lot of expressions on their faces before they looked away. Sadness, fear, pity. The big three, I called them. I'd made a game out of which ones I could, see most in a day. But the one that really stood out to me was the one that I saw the least. Glee. An unfettered, childish glee on their face, but something about the expression was sinister. They always stood completely still with these big, goofy smiles, and they never broke eye contact. They were the ones that got to me. The smilers scared me a little, but more than anything, they made me angry. Every time I got a look at one of those wide-eyed, happy-faced bastards, my blood started to boil. But just as soon as I would muster up the courage to go confront them, something would interrupt, and when I looked back, they were always gone. It had taken me a couple of years, but I'd finally saved up enough money to move out of my shitty apartment in the crowded city to a small home in the countryside. The place was a piece of junk, but the closest neighbor was 2 miles in either direction. I could finally be alone. I was packing all of my worldly possessions into a van I'd rented for the move when I noticed the streets around my place were far more crowded than usual. Get a good look, assholes. This is the last you'll see of me, I thought, and started up the game. Pity, fear, sadness, pity, fear, sadness. Oh, confusion. That was a new one. Fear, pity, and then I saw him. The area around him was the only clear area of the street now that more people were starting to gather. Huge grin, massive, unblinking eyes, a smiler. Since it was my last day in the big city, I decided to go for broke. I wasn't going to stand there and let that asshole mock me. I dropped the box I'd been loading and started marching toward the offending ray of sunshine. Someone tapped my shoulder. "Do you have the time?" "Fuck off," I growled, continuing forward, never breaking eye contact with the smiler. Someone stepped in front of me and commented on the weather. I shoved him aside and continued toward the smiler. Another person attempted to get my attention, claiming that it had been years since they'd seen me. I stayed the course. I was just within shouting distance when someone on a bicycle barreled into me. I fell backward into a pile of trash bags. Gotta love the city. I stood up, ready to trade blows and insurance information with the douchebag that hit me, but he was gone. He'd run into the crowd. And, as usual, when I looked to where the smiler had stood, there was no one there. The look on everyone's faces was relief. The look on mine was disgust. I was sick of that town, sick of its ridiculous, slack-jawed masses who had nothing better to do than stare at a stranger all day, but most of all, I was sick of the smilers. I finished packing my stuff, got in the van, and left. It was about 8 p.m. and I was settling in nicely. Sitting on my futon and browsing a forum, I noticed something out my window. I thought I saw movement on the road. I got up to look outside and saw that there was a shadowy figure at the end of my driveway. I opened the door and went out to meet who I assumed was a neighbor coming to greet the new arrival. I didn't know why they were coming by so late, but I'd lived in the city my whole life. Maybe things were different out there. I was about halfway down my driveway when I remembered the ad. The entire reason I'd purchased the house in the first place. No neighbors. It was enough to turn me around and send me sprinting back inside. I slammed the door and locked it. I turned to go to the bedroom where I'd left my cell phone. As I was reaching for it, my late-night visitor appeared in the window. It was the smiler from earlier that day. He was staring at me with his huge eyes, and I felt my blood freeze. Why had he followed me? I picked up the phone and tried to call for help, but no good. I had no signal way out in the countryside. I cursed, and he smiled. For a long time, we just stared at each other. After a while, my fear turned to anger. What was he doing here? Who the hell did he think he was? He grinned at me like they always did, but this was different than seeing one in a crowded mall or across the street. He was on my property. He was invading my privacy. I had had enough. I strode angrily over to the window and met his gaze. I could hear him breathing heavily on the other side of the glass. It sounded hollow. I pounded my fist on the glass and shouted furiously, "What the hell do you want?" In an instant, he changed. His smile spread so wide that it literally split his face from ear to ear. His pupils narrowed to a vertical slit, and as if my question had been the invitation he'd been waiting for, he smashed through the only barrier protecting me with a clawed hand and pulled me out into the ground. The blood from his ruined face dripped onto my forehead as he stared down at me. He was joined by others. Despite their new appearances, I recognized them instantly as every smiler I had ever encountered. In the final moments of my life, I realized that all of those people, for all of those years, hadn't been watching me. They'd been watching out for me.